Welcome to the Creative Commons RX podcast. Before diving into this episode, I want to ensure we're all on the same page. This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.
You know, anticoagulants, or blood thinners, as most of us call them, are absolute lifesavers. I mean, they prevent strokes, they stop deadly clots, millions of people rely on them every single day. But, and this is a huge but, these incredibly powerful drugs have a really dangerous flip side. In a moment crisis, like a serious injury or an internal bleed, they can turn what should be a manageable problem into a total catastrophe. And that right there, that's the central conflict for emergency doctors pretty much every single day. How on earth you stop a drug that was designed to prevent clotting when you desperately need a clot to form right now to save someone's life? So let's dive in and break down this incredible high-stakes medical challenge. Okay, so to really get our heads around the solutions, we first have to fully appreciate the problem. And it all boils down to this fundamental paradox, right at the very heart of anticoagulation therapy. Here's a simple way to think about it. An anticoagulant is kind of like a dimmer switch for your blood's ability to clot. Now, for a lot of people, that switch is turned up way too high, creating a serious risk for dangerous clots. These drugs, well, they just turn that stickiness down to a much safer level. And this is where you really see the dilemma in action. On one side, you've got this incredible protection from some of the scariest things in medicine, like strokes. But on the other side, any injury, any internal bleed, suddenly becomes incredibly high risk. Why? Because the body's #1 defense mechanism, clotting, has been switched off on purpose. All right, so how do doctors actually deal with this? Let's kick things off with the old classic, the one that's been on the scene for more than half a century, warfarin. Warfarin's whole strategy is to stop the liver from using vitamin K, which is an absolutely essential ingredient for making several of our key clotting factors. So basically, you starve the factory of its raw materials, and you end up with fewer clotting factors in the blood. And that's a super important point, because it tells you exactly how you're going to reverse it. And this right here, it's a brilliant three-pronged attack. First up, you stop the drug. Sounds obvious, right? But it's step 1 for a reason. Second, you give vitamin K IV. This gives the liver the raw materials it needs to start making its own clotting factors again, but that takes time. So for the right now problem, you move to step 3. You infuse prothrombin complex concentrates, or PCCs. This is basically a bag of the very clotting factors the patient is missing. It's an immediate fix. Now, for years, the go-to was something called fresh frozen plasma, or FFP. It has clotting factors, sure, but the modern approach, 4-factor PCC, is just so much better. It's super concentrated, which means you're giving a much smaller volume, and that's a huge deal for critically ill patients. It's faster, it's more reliable, which is why PCC is the undisputed champion, the standard of care today for reversing warfarin in an emergency. No question. But hold on, the story doesn't stop there, not by a long shot. In the last decade or so, a whole new generation of drugs has shown up, and with them, a completely new generation of reversal agents. So these newer drugs are called DOACs, direct oral anticoagulants, and they came with a huge selling point, a lower risk of spontaneous brain bleeds compared to warfarin. But their mechanism is totally different. They don't stop the factory from making factors, they directly block one single specific factor in the whole clotting process. And this created a brand new challenge for emergency physicians. And this is where the whole game changes. Reversing warfarin with PCCs, it's kind of like using a sledgehammer. You just flood the system with all the factors you're missing. But reversing DOACs? For that, you need a scalpel, a precision tool. It's not about replacing factors anymore. It's about neutralizing the drug itself with a custom-designed antidote. And these antidotes are seriously cool. For drugs like apixaban and rivaroxaban, which block something called factor XA, we have andexanet alpha. It's this incredibly clever piece of bioengineering, basically a decoy molecule that looks just like factor XA. So the drug binds to the decoy instead of the real thing. Then for dabigatran, which blocks a different target called thrombin, the antidote is idarucizumab. And it works like a custom-built magnet, specifically grabbing onto dabigatran molecules and just pulling them out of circulation. Okay, so we've talked anticoagulants, but the plot thickens. What about drugs that mess with your bleeding risk in a totally different way? This leads us to a really fascinating puzzle, and it involves some of the most common medications in the world. I'm talking about drugs like aspirin and clopidogrel. Now, these work on platelets, the tiny little cells that form the first plug when you get a cut. They don't touch the clotting factors like warfarin or the DOACs do. They just make platelets less sticky. So if someone with a brain bleed is on aspirin, the solution seems obvious, doesn't it? I mean, if their own platelets aren't working right because of the drug, just give them new ones, right? Transfuse some fresh, working platelets. For years, that's exactly what doctors did. It just made sense. But, medicine is rarely that straightforward. And then the patch trial happened, and it completely turned everything on its head. Honestly, the results sent shockwaves through the medical community. They found that patients with brain bleeds on antiplatelet drugs who got platelet transfusions, they actually did worse. They had worse outcomes, and there was even a trend towards more bleeding. So, get this. That intervention, the one that seemed so logical, was actually harming patients. It's just such a powerful reminder that common sense in medicine absolutely has to be proven with hard evidence. So now, doctors avoid routine platelet transfusions in these cases, and instead they look at other, less certain options, like a drug called desmopressin. All right, just one more major class to cover here. These are the ones you mostly see used inside the hospital. They're given by IV or injection, they're called heparins, and, well, they have their own little quirks when it comes to reversal. Okay, so you've got two main players here, and they both use the same reversal agent, protamine sulfate. But, and here's the catch, it doesn't work the same for both. For the standard unfractionated heparin, protamine works like a charm, complete neutralization. But for the more modern, low molecular weight heparin, protamine only gives you a partial, incomplete reversal. And that's a critical distinction that doctors have to manage really, really carefully.
So the emergency is over. The bleeding has been stopped. The patient is stable. But now comes what might just be the hardest question of all.
Think about it. You have a patient who absolutely needs a blood thinner to prevent a stroke, but that exact same drug just caused a massive, life-threatening bleed. So, do you restart it? This is the ultimate medical tightrope walk. And let me tell ya, there is no simple, one-size-fits-all answer here. Doctors have to weigh a huge number of things. How high is the patient's clotting risk? Someone with a mechanical heart valve has an incredibly high risk. How bad was the bleed? A brain bleed is always treated with way more caution. Was the source of the bleed actually fixed? A bleeding ulcer that's been clipped is less of a long-term worry. As a general rule of thumb, especially for brain bleeds, doctors will wait at least 4 weeks before they even think about restarting. In the end, it all boils down to this one incredibly tough question. When a medicine can both save a life and threaten it, the decision to use it, to stop it, and maybe to restart it, that is one of the most complex and human challenges in all of medicine. There is no perfect answer, only a careful, thoughtful weighing of risks in the delicate balance of blood.
This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.